The story of Israel and Iran is not one of ancient, unending hatred. In fact, for many years they were allies. Before the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the two nations shared intelligence and had strong diplomatic ties. They saw common threats in the Arab world and worked together to counter them. This period of cooperation, however, now feels like a distant memory, a chapter from a completely different book. The revolution changed everything. It brought a new government to power in Tehran with a vastly different worldview and a deep ideological opposition to Israel's existence, setting the stage for decades of conflict. The 1979 revolution installed a leadership that viewed Israel not as a potential partner, but as an illegitimate state and an extension of Western power in the Middle East. This new government in Iran began to actively support groups that opposed Israel, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Palestine. This support was not just verbal, it included funding, weapons and training. For its part, Israel came to see Iran as its most dangerous and determined enemy. This shift created a new and perilous dynamic in the region, turning former partners into sworn adversaries who would compete for influence and power through a long and often bloody shadow war. This conflict did not play out in large, conventional battles between the two countries' armies. Instead, it has been fought through proxies, covert operations, and assassinations for many years. Israel has been accused of targeting Iranian nuclear scientists and military officials, aiming to slow down what it perceives as an existential threat. Iran, in turn, has used its network of allied militias across the Middle East, in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, to put pressure on Israel and its interests. This indirect warfare has allowed both sides to inflict damage without triggering an all-out war, but it has also created a state of permanent simmering hostility that constantly threatens to boil over. This long history of proxy fighting and secret operations has built a mountain of mistrust and animosity. Each action by one side is seen by the other as a profound provocation, justifying an even stronger response. This cycle of retaliation has deepened the divide, making any form of direct communication or diplomacy nearly impossible to imagine. The governments in both Jerusalem and Tehran have built their national security strategies around countering the other. This deeply ingrained rivalry forms the foundation for the current crisis, where years of smaller clashes are now threatening to ignite a much larger and more destructive regional conflict for everyone involved. At the heart of the current tension lies Iran's nuclear program. For years, Iran has insisted that its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes only, such as generating electricity and for medical research. It maintains that it has a right, like any other nation, to develop nuclear technology. However, many countries, especially Israel, do not believe these claims. The international community has watched with growing concern as Iran has enriched uranium to higher and higher levels of purity. While Iran's current enrichment level of 60% is not enough for a bomb, it is alarmingly close to the 90% purity that is considered weapons grade, a threshold that raises serious alarms. For Israel, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is not just a strategic problem, it is seen as an existential threat, a danger to the country's very survival. Israeli leaders have repeatedly stated they will never allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. They point to the fiery rhetoric from some Iranian officials who have called for Israel's destruction. The fear is that if Iran possessed the ultimate weapon, it might one day use it, or at the very least, use the threat of a nuclear attack to shield its proxy forces like Hezbollah, allowing them to act against Israel with impunity. This fear drives Israel's aggressive stance and its willingness to consider military action to stop the program. The international community has tried to manage this threat through diplomacy and sanctions. The most significant effort was the 2015 nuclear deal, which limited Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for lifting economic sanctions. However, the United States withdrew from that agreement in 2018, and subsequent attempts to revive it have failed. Now, in June 2025, negotiations have once again broken down. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the world's nuclear watchdog, recently passed a resolution censoring Iran for not being transparent about its activities. In response, Iran has defiantly announced it will expand its enrichment capabilities even further, escalating the crisis to a new level. This escalation has pushed Israel into a corner. With diplomacy faltering and Iran moving closer to a nuclear capability, Israeli leaders feel their window to act is closing. Iran is not only enriching uranium but also improving its defenses, making any future military strike more difficult and dangerous. After a successful Israeli operation in October 2024 damaged Iran's air defense systems, there is now a sense of urgency in Jerusalem. The fear is that if they wait too long, it may become impossible to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions without starting a catastrophic war. This is the logic driving reports that Israel is now poised to launch a unilateral strike. The situation has become incredibly tense in recent weeks, moving beyond threats and into concrete preparations for a possible war. According to intelligence reports from the United States and Europe, Israel is now fully prepared to launch a unilateral military strike against Iran, possibly within days. The exact nature of such an attack is not public, but it would almost certainly target Iran's nuclear facilities. This is a significant step. In the past, Israel has relied on covert operations, but a direct, large-scale military strike would be an act of war, crossing a line that has been carefully avoided for decades and risking an immediate and powerful response from Tehran. Iran has made it clear that it will not stand by idly if attacked. The commander of its powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has warned of a history-making response that would go far beyond the retaliatory strikes Iran launched against Israel over the past year. Iran's defense minister has declared that all American military bases in the region would be considered legitimate targets in the event of an Israeli attack. To back up these threats, Iran has recently tested a powerful new ballistic missile and has ordered more military exercises, putting its armed forces on high alert. This defiant posture is meant to deter an Israeli strike by promising overwhelming retaliation. The United States, a key ally of Israel, finds itself in a difficult position. The current Trump administration has officially stated that it does not support an Israeli strike and has been urging a diplomatic solution. However, diplomacy is failing. The United States has signaled to Iran that it may not be able to stop Israel, creating ambiguity about its role. Actions like the partial evacuation of United States embassy staff in Iraq and authorizing military families to leave the region send a message that the situation is serious. While the United States would not likely participate in an Israeli attack, it might provide intelligence support, further complicating its role as it tries to prevent a wider war. This dangerous standoff is happening while other conflicts continue to rage. The war in Gaza has already created immense suffering and instability across the region, with over 55,000 Palestinians reported killed since the conflict began in late 2023. An open war between Israel and Iran would add a terrifying new dimension to the existing turmoil. It could draw in other countries and actors, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to militias in Syria and Iraq, potentially igniting a massive multi-front war. The entire Middle East is holding its breath, as the actions of these two nations could plunge the region into a conflict far more devastating than anything it has seen in recent memory. The escalating crisis between Israel and Iran is not just a regional issue, it is a global one. People around the world are watching with deep concern. In the Middle East, citizens are living with the daily fear that their lives could be upended by a war that they did not choose. Decades of conflict have already taken a heavy toll, and the thought of another larger war is terrifying. Many people simply want to live in peace, to raise their families and build a future free from the constant threat of violence. They are caught between governments locked in a power struggle, and they would be the ones to pay the highest price if war breaks out. Major world powers are also deeply involved, trying to navigate this perilous situation. The United States is attempting a difficult balancing act, trying to support its ally Israel while also preventing a wider conflict that would harm its own interests and personnel in the region. European nations, along with Britain, are urging restraint and a return to diplomacy, worried about the devastating humanitarian consequences of a war. They are also concerned about the global economy, as a major conflict in the Middle East could disrupt oil supplies and send shockwaves through international markets. Britain has already issued new warnings for commercial shipping in the area, highlighting the immediate risks. Finding a path back from the brink will require immense effort and a genuine commitment to de-escalation from all sides. The first step must be to reopen channels for communication. Even if direct talks between Israel and Iran are impossible, third-party countries like Oman have offered to mediate, and these efforts should be supported. International powers must work together to create an off-ramp, offering both sides a way to step back without losing face. This could involve new security guarantees for Israel and a revised diplomatic approach to Iran's nuclear program that addresses both its rights and the world's security concerns. Ultimately, peace is the only viable solution. A war between Israel and Iran would be a catastrophe with no real winners. It would lead to immense loss of life, destroy infrastructure, and create a refugee crisis that would destabilize the entire region and beyond for generations. The cycle of threats and retaliation must be broken. Instead of preparing for war, leaders must have the courage to pursue peace, even when it seems impossible. The safety and future of millions of people in the Middle East and the stability of the entire world depend on their ability to choose diplomacy over destruction before it is too late.